welcome to your deep dive. Our goal here, like always, is to take this complex stuff, information that can feel, a bit much, and really unpack it so you walk away with a clearer idea of what's actually important.
Exactly. And today we're digging into a recent video. It features Ray Dalio. The title is Ray Dalio Explains Why America is Entering a Terrible Financial Crisis. Came out on the Free Investing YouTube channel.
Right. And just to kind of set the scene for everyone listening, it's April 2025 right now. And we're focusing on the pretty urgent warnings he lays out in this video.
He talks about these 5 big forces he sees interacting. It's based on his study of the last 500 years of history.
Okay, so what are they?
Well, first, there's debt creation and money printing. Big one. Second, internal conflict. Think polarization, populism, the gaps in wealth and values.
We see that. Yeah.
Third is great power conflict, nations competing on the global stage. Fourth, acts of nature, climate change, pandemics, that sort of thing.
Right.
And fifth, technology. Its development is relentless. But the key, he says, is how these things are interacting now, creating these major cycles.
Okay, so lots going on. But for this deep dive, what's our main goal? What are we trying to figure out?
Good question. We really want to pinpoint what Dalio, speaking now, April 2025, flags as the crisis. The one that might have the most lasting, the most profound impact out of all these.
Got it. Okay, so let's maybe start with that first force he mentions, debt and money printing. His basic question is pretty stark, isn't it? Like, are there actually limits? Can you just keep creating debt and printing money forever?
Yeah, it's fundamental. And what's really interesting is how he maps out monetary policy history through debt crises. He sees 3 phases. Phase 1 was interest rate policy, originally tied to something real, like gold.
Gold standard, yeah.
Right. But that broke down. Why? Well, governments printed too much money, basically undermining the link.
Okay, so that system breaks. What's phase 2?
Phase 2 is quantitative easing, QE. We've heard a lot about that. That's when central banks, they step in and buy bonds, essentially printing money to do it, injecting liquidity.
But Dalio points out a problem there, doesn't he?
He does. He says, look, this mainly helps people who own financial assets. The benefits don't always, trickle down effectively to the whole economy.
Right. Which brings us to phase 3.
Phase 3. And this is where it gets really relevant to now. It's the coordination of fiscal policy, that's government spending and taxing, with monetary policy, the central bank stuff. He gives 2020 to 2022 as a huge example. Government spending, big central banks creating money and credit to help make it happen.
And the result?
Inflation. Big inflationary cycle. We definitely felt that.
So, okay, we've got all this government debt now, massive amounts. Central banks are buying a lot of it. What are the risks Dalio sees there?
Well, this is where it gets tricky. Central banks hold these government bonds. But if interest rates go up, the value of those bonds goes down. So the central bank itself could be looking at losses. He mentions the Bank of England as an example, recently facing this.
And if the central bank has losses, what happens?
They might have to print more money just to cover their own issues, which, adds to the problem.
Creates a kind of spiral.
Exactly. And Dalio also flags the danger point where just paying the interest on the debt servicing costs starts squeezing out everything else. Less money for public services, maybe less consumer spending because taxes are high or confidence is low. It feeds on itself.
Okay, and what's the sort of end game scenario he worries about?
It's about confidence. If the people or countries holding all that government debt lose faith, if they think they might not get paid back properly or the money they get back will be worthless,
they start selling the bonds.
They start selling.
Yeah.
And that puts the central bank in a terrible bind. Do they let interest rates shoot up to attract buyers, potentially crashing the economy? Or do they print even more money to buy the bonds themselves, risking serious currency devaluation? Not great options.
Wow. Okay. So that's the financial side. Pretty worrying.
Yeah.
But you said we're looking for the most lasting crisis he identifies.
Right. Now, Dalio does mention historically things like pandemics or climate shifts. Acts of nature have had huge effects, maybe even bigger than the financial stuff sometimes.
Okay.
But he pivots back to today. And he stresses it's the combination, the confluence of all 5 forces right now that's uniquely dangerous. And he really, really emphasizes the interplay between the financial stress we just talked about, the internal conflict within countries, and the rising geopolitical tensions.
Okay, so it's the mix. And which part of that mix does he seem most concerned about for long-term impact?
It's the internal conflict. That's what he really flags. He talks about, the extreme populism left and right, the huge gaps in wealth, but also in values, what people believe, what they see as right and wrong.
And how does that become the most lasting threat?
Because it potentially undermines the very foundations, the rule of law, the acceptance of democratic outcomes. He makes this point about irreconcilable differences. When groups within a society feel the system is fundamentally unfair, or they simply cannot accept losing an election or a court case.
That sounds familiar.
Doesn't it? He draws parallels to periods leading up to civil wars historically, times when the social fabric just rips apart because there's no agreement on the basic rules anymore.
Then he sees signs of that now in April 2025.
He does. He points to the intense legal battles, the constant questioning of fairness, the challenges to election results. He says these are typical signs in these historical cycles when things are getting dangerous.
It's a chilling idea, the thought that the rule book itself is being questioned.
Exactly. And he connects this internal division directly to problems between countries, too. If a country is deeply divided internally, different factions might actually push for more aggressive foreign policy or become unreliable partners. It spills over.
So internal conflict can worsen geopolitical conflict.
Definitely. And his warning is really blunt. She says, when we abandon the rule book, what comes next is terrible. Full stop. He stresses how vital it is to, cherish the rules of democracy and law, especially when we don't like the outcome.
So tying it back, while a financial crisis is obviously damaging, Dalio seems to be arguing here in April 2025 that this potential breakdown of internal order, the erosion of law and democratic norms, that could be far more fundamental, more lasting in its damage.
I think that's exactly his point. Because if you lose that shared commitment to the rules, how do you even begin to fix the financial problems or manage international relations peacefully? That foundation, that societal cohesion and rule of law, it's what everything else rests on. If that crumbles, you can't address the other crises effectively. It's the bedrock.
That makes a lot of sense. A sobering thought. Now, you mentioned he also touched on money and assets in this kind of environment. Briefly, what was his take there?
Yeah, just quickly. He reminds us debt is just a promise to deliver money later. And money itself, well, it's also kind of debt instrument, isn't it? A claim.
Okay.
He talks about two types of inflation. Monetary inflation, that's the one he thinks we have now, basically too much money and credit created relative to goods and services.
Right, the money printing effect.
Exactly. Versus demand pull inflation, which is more about demand just outstripping supply.
And in this environment of monetary inflation,
He suggests real assets could be important. Things with intrinsic value, accepted globally, maybe transportable. He often mentions gold as an example. Things that might hold value if currencies are being devalued.
he also had that interesting historical point about financial assets, didn't he?
Oh yeah, about the Dutch basically inventing financial assets claims on future income, like stocks and bonds. His caution is that we sometimes forget these only have value if they can eventually be turned back into real stuff, real goods, real services.
And too many paper claims chasing too few real things. That's unstable.
Historically, yes. When the pile of financial assets gets huge compared to the real economy, it can create fragility. And one last point he makes is that in serious crises, governments might impose rules like foreign exchange controls, limiting your ability to move money out of the country, something to be aware of.
Okay. So, pulling all this together from Dalio's April 2025 perspective, it's a complex picture. Interconnected crises, financial system stress is serious, absolutely. But his really urgent warning seems to be about this internal conflict, this potential unraveling of societal rules and trust. That seems to be what he sees as having the deepest, most lasting potential consequences.
I think that's the core takeaway. And reflecting on it all, it really drives home that, yes, financial stability matters a lot. But maybe the resilience of our society itself, our shared values, our actual commitment to playing by the rules, the rule of law, maybe that's the most critical asset we have for getting through whatever turbulence is ahead. It really makes you ask, what does it mean for each of us, day to day to actually safeguard those principles, especially when things get tense or frustrating?
That's a powerful question to leave people with. So what are your thoughts listening to this? Do Dalio's warnings resonate? Which parts of these interconnected issues worry you the most? Please share your perspectives, your ideas, maybe suggestions for other topics we should dive into. Let us know in the comments. Your insights really help us all make sense of this complicated world.
Absolutely. That's all for this deep dive.